I thought instead of focusing on a single player to ask what happened to their career, what about talking about young NBA cores that got a bunch of hype because of what they could possibly do in the future? The thing with young cores are, most of them don't work out or they get traded to other teams. Everyone is always chasing that 2012 Oklahoma City Thunder model, but usually you just have a talented group of players that flame out or they need to develop somewhere else because the skill sets don't mesh. There are 5 young cores in here, so let's go into number 1. Back in the year 2014, there was some hope around the Orlando Magic team since they traded away Dwight Howard. 11 of the 15 players on their roster were 25 years old or younger, but the main young core pieces that had everyone excited were rookie Aaron Gordon, Victor Oladipo, Tobias Harris, and Nikola Vucevic. They also had Elfrid Payton and Evan Fournier. The Magic weren't any good because most of the time when you have a group of young players with no veterans, you're going to be a bad or below average team, but you saw what could be a core of a decent team in the future. Tobias Harris had the prototypical tools. He was a 6'8" small forward that could shoot and put the ball on the floor. Those are the guys teams around the league are looking for because they can become star players. You had Nikola Vucevic, who was a center putting up 19 and 10 by his 4th season, and you had Victor Oladipo, the number 2 pick in the 2013 draft, an athletic guard who could get out in transition. He had the tools to be a two-way player on the perimeter. Add in some veterans and maybe you have something of a real team, but that's not what happened. The front office eventually broke up the team. Victor Oladipo was traded to the Oklahoma City Thunder for Serge Ibaka in the summer of 2016, and Tobias Harris was traded to the Pistons at the 2016 trade deadline. None of the players left from that young core from 2014 are on the team anymore. Victor Oladipo is on the Miami Heat, and because of injuries, he probably will never get back to his all-NBA level of play. Elfrid Payton bounced around the league and he's now with the Knicks. Nikola Vucevic was traded to Chicago after being in Orlando for what felt like forever. Aaron Gordon is finally out of Orlando and playing with Nikola Jokic in Denver. So how good would this team be today? Individually, they had strengths, but as a team, I don't know if they have enough three-point shooting at the guard spot to keep up with other offenses. And with Vucevic at the center spot, they were always going to be making up ground defensively. This was a pretty talented group of players, but every time you watch them each year, you're like, this guy needs to be on a different team. This situation does not make sense. The 2016-2017 Lakers young core has aged pretty well when you're looking at them from an individual standpoint. The core was D'Angelo Russell, Julius Randle, Brandon Ingram, Jordan Clarkson, Larry Nance, and Ivica Zubac. The team wasn't great because they were young and the fit between all the ball handlers was weird, but the collection of talent, you could see that they all had skills that were going to make their teams better once they got more reps in the league. I remember people saying last year, oh, imagine if the Lakers were patient and didn't mortgage their future for Anthony Davis and LeBron, who was getting older each year. Imagine Julius Randle playing off of Brandon Ingram. Imagine D'Angelo Russell with those guys when they're 25 or 26 years old. You know, I'll take the end of LeBron's prime plus Anthony Davis over tying yourself into long-term deals with a group of young players that don't exactly mesh defensively. I mean, they'll be able to put up points on a lot of nights, but there are other things that contribute to a winning basketball team. I mean, you see amazing players like Damian Lillard who are really struggling to get out of the first round, so why would you expect a bunch of young guys who have a lot of little things to work on to be competitive in the West? Brandon Ingram needed to be in a situation where he's able to initiate offense. Julius Randle doesn't become the best player on the 4th-seeded Knicks if he's with another guy who's also learning how to operate an NBA offense. D'Angelo Russell wasn't ready for Los Angeles at that stage of his career. You've seen development from pretty much everyone here. Brandon Ingram's talent as a guy who creates offenses developing in New Orleans. Julius Randle went from someone who struggled to see double teams at all and stay composed as a scorer against locked-in defenses to being the number 1 guy on a playoff team. He didn't have a great playoffs at all. He looked really bad. He looked like his old self with the Pelicans, but we knew he wasn't a number 1. He needs another guy with him. Jordan Clarkson was an off-the-bench guy for the Lakers and at one point was carrying that Lakers offense when guys were injured. He's the 6th man of the year on the Jazz now. D'Angelo Russell, I thought he'd be a little farther ahead with his development, maybe where De'Aaron Fox is as an individual player, but that one season in Brooklyn was awesome. Injuries have kept D'Angelo off the court this past year. Zubac was a 2nd-round pick and is the starting center for the LA Clippers. Larry Nance is one of the more underrated role players in the league with the Cavaliers. He now has a 3-point shot and does a little bit of passing stuff at the elbow. This is a really good group of young players, but they all needed to be in their own situations. The Phoenix Suns back in the 2017-2018 season had what they thought was a future young core that could eventually compete in the Western Conference. They had Devin Booker in his 3rd season, who just came off of a season averaging 22 a game. They had Marquise Chris and Dragan Bender, who they picked with the 4th and 8th pick in the draft the previous year, and they just drafted Josh Jackson with the 4th pick. He was somebody people thought before the draft could eventually become a star player. You could also add in Elfrid Payton, TJ Warren, and Alex Len, who were all 24 years old or younger on the team that season, but the main core started with Booker and Jackson and those 2 draft picks. Like I've mentioned before, teams with lots of young players are usually bad because they can't compete against other veteran teams at the stages of their careers. This team was terrible, obviously. They lost 61 games. Before the draft, Dragan Bender was compared to Kristaps Porzingis because he could shoot and he was 7 feet tall, but he never impacted the game like a top 5 pick. He never really impacted the game at all. He was timid and got moved around on defense. There were times where you didn't even notice him on the court. Josh Jackson was a 6'8" forward that was athletic, but he struggled with his feel for the game within the Suns team offense. He turned the ball over, and he was inefficient with his outside shot, and eventually lost his minutes to Mikal Bridges the next season. You can say the same for Marquise Chris. He never became that consistent inside force as a big man, not to mention he wasn't a reliable teammate in Phoenix. He came into his 2nd season into the league out of shape and got worse. Devin Booker was obviously hooping and had no chance with what was a disaster coaching staff, front office, and roster at the time. This is probably one of the more depressing young cores you've seen. That group would have never formed a 5-man unit that made each other better, and they predictably flamed out. The only one left is Devin Booker. Dragan Bender is out of the league. Marquise Chris was in Golden State and played kind of well, but now he's out of the league after getting waived by the Spurs. Josh Jackson is getting up shots in Detroit, but he still isn't ready to contribute to a winning team at the moment. Elfrid Payton is torturing Knicks fans whenever he plays. Alex Len is getting those Zaza Pachulia minutes in Washington where he only plays like the first 4 minutes of each half, so that leaves TJ Warren and Devin Booker as the only players who are actual contributors today. Fortunately, the Suns, they're past that era of hoping a bunch of young players can pan out. They have a real team now that's going to be competitive. Back in the 2016-2017 season, the Milwaukee Bucks had a core of Jabari Parker, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Malcolm Brogdon, and Thon Maker. They made the playoffs after missing it the year before. They lost to the Raptors in round 1. Now, this was the season that Giannis really took off. He was 22 years old and made the 2nd team for both All-NBA and All-Defense. This is when you knew, okay, we might be looking at a future superstar, and that's what he became. Malcolm Brogdon was another success. He was a 24-year-old rookie and won Rookie of the Year. He wasn't a super vertical athlete like some of these other guards, but he could play both the 1 and the 2. He could defend, and he could make an open 3. But he had lower body injuries, and when his rookie contract came up, the Bucks didn't want to pay him long term because of those injuries, so the Bucks sent him to Indiana in a sign and trade. So Thon Maker, you guys remember the hype around him. He was a 7-footer that had a high school mixtape where he was dribbling up the court, shooting threes, doing crazy stuff. He was looked at as a modern big man that people thought could break out in the league. You even had Kevin Garnett telling people that Thon reminds him of himself. The Bucks picked him 10th in the draft that year. He was a major project, and that's what he pretty much stayed as. He never became this new type of big man that was going to dominate the league. He eventually got traded to Detroit, then signed with Cleveland. Now he's out of the league. Chris Middleton, you could also count in this, I guess. I don't really know what actually constitutes a young core. He was 25 years old at the time and in his 5th season, so if you count like 25 and under guys as a young core, I guess you can put him in. He missed a lot of that one season due to an injury, but he's been part of the team if you want to count him. Him and Giannis are the only ones left from that team. It's really unfortunate because even with Jabari Parker's passing and defensive weaknesses, he could really score and had some creativity off the bounce with his dribble. He averaged like 20 points per game that year, and injuries really ruined him. He never had a chance to really recover. This was a pretty good group of young players, to be honest. You have an MVP, an All-Star, and a borderline All-Star. The 2011-2012 Minnesota Timberwolves is a team I remember pretty well because there was some hype around their core of Kevin Love, Derek Williams, Ricky Rubio, and Wesley Johnson. Ricky Rubio was drafted by Minnesota in 2009, but he didn't make his debut with the team until 2 years later. He was playing in Spain still. Kevin Love was coming off a season winning Most Improved Player. Wesley Johnson might be the most forgettable top 4 pick like ever, but he was in his 2nd season, and they also just drafted Derek Williams, who had insane hype coming out of the NCAA tournament. He played at Arizona and shot up the draft boards because of his athleticism at the forward spot. You had the elite passing and vision at the point guard spot with Rubio. He could play off of Derek Williams in transition. Maybe Wesley Johnson has a good 2nd year of development. And of course you got Kevin Love, who was a very consistent offensive player in the post, and he was beginning to step out to the 3-point line. But this core had no chance because of the lack of talent on the roster, being in a super tough Western Conference, and there was nothing great about the coaching staff or the front office. The Wolves were terrible that first year and traded Wesley Johnson in the summer. The next season, the Wolves were pretty respectable and won 40 games. They had a decent starting unit with Kevin Love, Rubio, Kevin Martin, Corey Brewer, and Nikola Pekovic, but Derek Williams was eventually traded in the middle of that season, which left just Love and Rubio on the team. That core did not last long. Wesley Johnson and Derek Williams are out of the league, while Rubio and Love are still playing. The problem with Derek Williams was that he wasn't a small forward or a power forward. He was an in-between guy. He couldn't keep up with other small forwards on the perimeter on defense, and when you put him at the power forward spot, he wasn't big enough to keep up on the glass. And when you factor in that his three-point shot didn't translate from college, it was hard for him to stay on the court. Wesley Johnson, on the other hand, he was just a below-average role player, and he never had top 5 draft talent. Kevin Love was eventually traded to Cleveland and won a title, and he might get traded again. Ricky Rubio has moved around the league a bit since those Timberwolves years. He played in Phoenix, Utah, and now is back in Minnesota. He didn't live up to the pre-draft hype in 2009, but he's been a pretty respectable pro. I might make a longer video about his hype before he got to the league. That's an interesting story. So that's it for me. Appreciate it if you made it to the end of this one. Let me know how you're feeling about these players now, and if you did enjoy the video, make sure to leave a like as it does help the channel do better, and consider subscribing if you want to see more from me.